In order to study biology, which is the study of life, we need to first talk about what is life. And there are 8 characteristics of life. And we use this mnemonic device, RareHog, to help us remember. If it helps you to remember, great. If it doesn't, then forget it. But you don't need to learn anything about actual pigs. So in order to be considered alive, you must have all 8 characteristics of life. And any living thing is called an organism. So a single-celled bacteria is an organism. A human is an organism. A tree, an organism, because they're all alive. The first characteristic of life is reproduction. An organism doesn't necessarily have to be able to reproduce in order to be considered alive. If you look at a woman who has had a hysterectomy, she's still considered alive even though she can't produce an offspring. But the species must be able to reproduce. So a human species or the human species can reproduce. And so therefore, even though a woman has had a hysterectomy, is still considered alive. There are 2 types of reproduction that we're going to talk about this year, and one is asexual reproduction. And that's a genetically identical copy. So if you look in the picture here, you can see how a plant is budding, producing an offspring, and here it's a separate entity, but it's genetically the same. And so therefore, this is asexual reproduction. This is a clone of this. The other type of reproduction we're going to talk about is sexual reproduction. And that's when you have a mom and a dad, and they combine their DNA, and they create something genetically brand new, something different. And that's sexual reproduction. In order to be considered alive, you have to have been able to adapt or evolve, or your species had to have been able to adapt and evolve. We all started out as bacteria 3.7 billion years ago. And in order to get to where we are today, you've had to have been able to adapt to your environment and change over time. And so to be alive, you must have been able to, or your species must have been able to adapt and evolve. You must be able to respond to an environment. So if I were to drop a book, your response might be to blink, suck in your breath a little bit, maybe release some adrenaline. And so this is a response to a stimulus. The stimulus is the thing in which you respond to. And so if you see here, we have a picture of a flower. And you can see that the flower is turning towards the sun. That's because plants need sun. And so if it's facing it, it's going to be able to make more glucose through photosynthesis. And so it's responding to the stimulus, the sun. This is a Venus flytrap. Its stimulus is a fly, and the response will be to close on it. E. Energy and materials. In order to be considered alive, you have to be able to obtain materials and energy to grow, develop, and reproduce. Please understand that energy and materials are 2 different things. Energy is the ability to do work, and materials are the elements that you're made up of. Carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, etc., etc. And when you eat food, when you obtain your energy and materials, you need to break that food down. You break them down into tiny little pieces. They pass through the lining of your small intestines and into your blood. And then we build them back up into larger pieces, into molecules like proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. So we break things down into very small pieces through chemical reactions. And then we build them up into bigger pieces that we use through more chemical reactions. And all of the chemical reactions in your body is your metabolism. So all of the breaking down and the building back up of your food and your nutrients is your metabolism. Homeostasis is the next characteristic of life. Organisms keep their internal environment relatively stable. So if you were to walk outside, your temperature, your internal temperature, isn't necessarily going to drop to 0 if it's 0 degrees outside or 0 degrees Celsius. But if it's very warm inside, your temperature also is not going to rise up to 103 degrees. You try and maintain a relatively stable environment at 98.6 degrees. So if you get really, really cold, your body's going to use different mechanisms like to shiver to warm back up. And if it gets really hot, it's going to use a mechanism like to sweat to cool back down. So you try and maintain a steady state of 98.6, but it's not consistently 98.6. Your body temperature is rising and falling, but around 98.6. And the same with the pH in your body. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, it's not going to stay stagnant. It's going to rise and fall, but it's going to stay around a specific pH. The next characteristic of life is organization. Organization of cells or by cells. And so living things are composed of cells. And if you have cells, or the same type of cells like skin cells or epithelial cells, if you have a whole bunch of them, you're going to have skin tissue or epithelial tissue. And if you take all of your epithelial tissue and you consider it an organ that surrounds your body, well, that would be your epidermis. And if you include your epidermis with your adipose tissue or your fat tissue, then you have an organ system. So you have many organ systems. You have a circulatory system, a skeletal system, an endocrine system that are all made up of organs, which are made up of tissue, which are made up of cells. And when you take all of those organ systems and you combine them, you have an organism or something alive. To be considered alive, you must be able to grow and develop. To grow is to get bigger, and to develop is to become more mature. So we not only get larger, if you look at this tadpole, it's going to grow legs, it's going to change shape, it's going to become a frog. So it is growing and developing. And finally, the last characteristic of life is genetic material. All organisms must contain DNA. It's the code of life. And DNA is nothing more than a set of instructions on how to make proteins. Proteins are what do all of the jobs in your body, or a vast majority of the jobs in your body. They give you your eye color, they determine how tall you get, they help you break down your food, they help you build the molecules back up. And so it is your DNA that makes proteins that make you who you are. And those are the characteristics of life. And in order to be considered alive, you must have all 8 of those characteristics. Thank you very much.